He stands in the middle of the Nevada desert at 3 in the morning, staring at the wreckage of a machine he gave 7 years of his life to. Tomorrow he has to walk into the director's office and explain where $50 million went. There was one truth that everyone in the United States intelligence community knew at the end of the 1950s. There is only one way to spy over a nuclear power. You have to climb high enough that no missile can reach you. This rule seemed as unbreakable as the law of gravity. The reconnaissance aircraft designated U-2 was the living embodiment of that doctrine. It climbed to more than 21 kilometers above Soviet soil. Surface-to-air missiles could not reach it. Fighter jets could not gain the altitude. 24 American pilots flew over the most secret facilities of the Soviet Union every year, and no one in Moscow could do anything about it. CIA analysts sorted through fresh photographs every morning. Missile bases beneath the Urals, new submarines in Murmansk, secret factories in Siberia. Information flowed in a continuous stream, and no one at headquarters in Langley doubted that this system would work forever. The confidence was absolute, almost self-satisfied, almost dangerous in its boundlessness. Military advisors reported to President Eisenhower directly and without reservation. As long as the U-2 is in the sky, the Soviet Union is an open book to America. No surprises, no shocks, no nuclear missiles that Washington will not learn about first. This confidence became the foundation of all American strategy in the Cold War, and that is precisely why what happened on the 1st of May, 1960, became a catastrophe that no one foresaw and no one was prepared for. A Soviet surface-to-air missile, the S-75, struck the American aircraft over Sverdlovsk at an altitude of 21 kilometers. Pilot Francis Gary Powers ejected and was captured by Soviet border guards at the landing site. Nikita Khrushchev personally took the podium of the Supreme Soviet and announced it to the world, displaying the wreckage of the American spy plane and the living pilot as irrefutable proof. The unbreakable rule crumbled to dust in a single day. Panic swept through the halls of the CIA, carefully concealed from the outside world and from allies. Spy satellites already existed, but their orbits were mathematically predictable, and Soviet command received advanced data on every pass of an American satellite over a classified facility and simply moved equipment into hangars hours beforehand. Something fundamentally different was needed, something unpredictable, something the enemy would not expect to see in the sky above its country. In 1962, an engineer at McDonnell Douglas put forward an idea that was initially received as a poor joke at a meeting. What if the reconnaissance platform looked like a bird? Not an aircraft shaped like a bird in aerodynamic terms. An actual bird, one that a radar would read as a living creature, and a Soviet soldier would see through binoculars as an eagle or falcon soaring freely over the steppe. The program director did not laugh. He asked how much it would cost. This idea was not born in a vacuum, nor from idle imagination. Behind it stood an understanding of one simple truth. Nature had already solved the problem of undetected flight over millions of years of evolution. Birds fly everywhere. They are part of the familiar visual background for any radar operator and any soldier with binoculars. No one raises an alarm at the sight of an eagle over a field. And that is precisely what made the idea not madness, but possibly a stroke of genius. His name is John. He is 34 years old. He is an aerodynamicist at McDonnell Douglas, a specialist in unconventional designs, the man his colleagues call the guy who takes on the problems everyone else walks away from. He has a wife named Mary, 2 children, a house in the suburbs of St. Louis, and a job he cannot tell anyone about. One morning in '62, he is called into the office of the head of the Special Project Division. Sitting there is a man in a civilian suit whose name John is not given and whose badge is not on his lapel. The man places a photograph of a soaring eagle on the table and says one sentence without preamble. "We need a machine that a radar sees exactly the way it sees this bird." John looks at the photograph, then at the man in the suit, then back at the photograph, and says, "All right." That evening, he comes home and sits down for dinner with his family. Mary asks what he is working on now. John stares at his plate and says he cannot tell her. It is a classified contract. Mary is used to classified contracts. McDonnell Douglas has been working for the Defense Department for many years. She nods and changes the subject, asking the children about school. But this time, something is different. This time, John knows that this secret will last not a month and not a year. He will be wrong about only one thing. It will last not several years, but 9. The assignment reads as follows: an unmanned aerial vehicle 1.5 meters in length, a wingspan of 2 meters 30 centimeters, a weight of 38 kilograms. The silhouette must be indistinguishable from a large bird of prey for visual observation, for acoustic systems, and for the enemy's radar complexes. A range of 2,200 kilometers, an operating altitude of up to 6,000 meters. Payload: high-resolution cameras and intelligence radio signal receivers. Timeline: as soon as possible. John grasps the scale of the task immediately. He is an aerodynamicist, and he knows one fundamental contradiction that makes this task nearly impossible. A bird flies the way it flies because it is alive. Its wings are constantly changing shape, muscles making micro-corrections 1,000 times per second in response to the slightest shifts in airflow. To reproduce that in a mechanical structure of the 1960s, using technologies that exist right now, is not an engineering problem. It is closer to a miracle. But the context of the war in which he is working leaves no room for philosophical reflection. It is 1962. The Soviet Union is deploying nuclear missiles in Cuba. In October, American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed the positions of Soviet missiles, and these photographs give President Kennedy the evidence he needs for his confrontation with Khrushchev. Without those photographs, the world might not have survived that October. Every day without reliable intelligence over Soviet territory is a day of blindness in the nuclear age. John assembles a team of 12 people: aerodynamicists, materials specialists, control systems engineers. He also brings in an ornithologist from the Smithsonian Institution and a radar signature specialist from a naval laboratory. The ornithologist does not know exactly what his consultations are needed for. The radar specialist does not know who is paying for the project. Each person knows only his own piece. This is a security rule that John enforces strictly. The first months, the team works on one thing. They learn to understand birds, not theoretically, but literally. The ornithologist rents high-speed cameras and they drive to a national park to film eagles and falcons in flight at 1,000 frames per second. Then they spend hours watching the slow-motion footage. Here is how a primary flight feather bends when entering a thermal. Here is how the tail functions as a rudder in a crosswind. Here is how a bird's body creates a minimal acoustic trace while soaring. Every detail matters. The neighboring offices in St. Louis think John's team is working on a new type of reconnaissance aircraft. It is a good cover story, plausible enough that no one checks it. Nobody knows about the Eagle. Nobody knows about the nuclear engine that the CIA handler mentions in a private conversation as one possible option for extending the drone's range. The office cleaner works only in common areas. John cleans the room with the blueprints himself every Friday evening. On weekends, John sometimes takes the children to the park. They watch birds through binoculars. The children think their father has simply taken up an interest in ornithology. He does not correct them. He watches a hawk soaring over the tree line and thinks about wing profile, about the center of pressure, about the rolling moment when entering a crosswind. It is his way of not losing the thread of work even on his day off. Mary notices this, but says nothing. The first serious contradiction surfaces after just 4 months of work. The wing profile. Classical aviation profiles provide predictable and reliable lift. but their radar signature is too characteristic and too easily distinguishable from a living bird even for the radars of that era. A bird's wing operates on fundamentally different principles. It is curved simultaneously in several planes, changes its geometry depending on the flight mode, and produces a radar signature that is impossible to replicate from a rigid structure. John spends 3 months in the wind tunnel testing 42 different wing profiles. 39 of them either produce an unacceptable radar signature or fly unstably, or fail to generate the required lift for the given structural weight. The 3 remaining options are compromises, each of them inferior to a living bird in some way. John selects the least bad one. This is the first of hundreds of such compromises he will have to make. The body materials are the second battle. Soviet radar systems of the time operate on frequencies that reflect well-off metal and certain types of plastic. This means metal in the structure must be kept to a minimum, and the surfaces must scatter the radar signal the same way a living bird's body does. The team experiments with early samples of carbon fiber, with fiberglass, with fabrics impregnated with specialized radar-absorbing compounds. Each material is tested in an anechoic chamber, its radar reflectivity measured at various angles of incidence, the result compared against data from a living bird. Most options are either too heavy or too brittle, or produce an unacceptable signature at certain angles. The materials team works 7 days a week for 3 months before finding a combination that works well enough. Acoustics demands its own genius. A gasoline engine producing 3.5 horsepower is a compact and fairly noisy machine. The sound of a running engine at 100 meters altitude on a quiet night carries several hundred meters in a moderate wind. A Soviet border post with well-trained soldiers ordered to pay attention to any unusual sounds will hear it and raise the alarm long before the drone reaches its target. The ornithologist records eagles on specialized directional microphones on a quiet, still night in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Then the acoustics team spends hours analyzing the recordings. The sound of the wing beats of a large bird of prey creates a very characteristic low-frequency background. With certain tuning of the Aquiline engine's rotational frequency, this background can be mimicked convincingly enough that an omnidirectional microphone cannot reliably distinguish the machine from a bird. But the main battle unfolds not in the laboratory. The main battle happens in the conference room when the CIA handler comes for the quarterly budget expenditure review. John presents progress on every front. The handler listens carefully, asks technical questions, and takes notes. Then he sets down his pen and says the sentence that changes the entire project for the next several years. We need the drone to stay airborne for 30 days without landing. John looks at the handler for a few seconds. 30 days. A range of 2,200 kilometers on a gasoline engine is one specific mission over one specific target, there and back with a small margin. 30 days of continuous flight is completely different physics, different energy requirements, and, to be direct, a different level of complexity altogether. The handler places a classified folder on the table. Inside are the technical specifications for a radioisotope thermoelectric generator based on plutonium-238, the same type of power source installed on American space probes designed for long interplanetary journeys. Compact, reliable, requiring no maintenance whatsoever. With such a power source, Aquiline can stay airborne for 30 days straight or cover a distance of 58,000 kilometers without a single refueling stop. 58,000 kilometers. John calculates in his head. That is 1.5 orbits around the Earth at the equator. A bird the size of an eagle, carrying a nuclear engine, circling over Soviet missile silos month after month, invisible to radars, indistinguishable to observers. In '63, this sounds like science fiction. John opens the folder, reads the first page of specifications, and decides he will take this on. But first he asks one question. What happens if this bird goes down over Soviet territory? The handler looks at him without particular expression and says that must not happen. John nods. He is an engineer, and he understands what that means in the language of technical requirements. The system's reliability must be such that the probability of losing the aircraft with its nuclear module over enemy territory approaches zero. He closes the folder and says they will figure it out. By the end of 1965, the first full-scale prototype is ready. It lies in the hangar in St. Louis under a special tarpaulin, and for the first time in 3 years, John allows himself to think that this might work. The machine is beautiful. The wings are curved correctly. The silhouette in the right lighting genuinely resembles a large bird of prey in soaring flight. He photographs it from 30 meters away and shows the shot to the ornithologist. The ornithologist studies it for a long time, then says he would not be certain at 500 meters. The next 6 months, the team works in parallel on 2 versions. The first, the gasoline variant for early flight tests that must begin as soon as possible to validate the concept itself. The second, a structural layout with a bay for the nuclear module, which for now exists only in calculations and blueprints. John is torn between 2 teams and 2 sets of technical requirements that sometimes contradict each other. On Fridays, he brings home a fatigue he can neither explain nor share with anyone. In the spring of 1966, the first 3 full-scale Aquiline prototypes are loaded onto a transport aircraft and flown to a test range in Nevada. John flies on the same plane. In 4 years of working on the project, he has spent less time at home in total than in any previous year of his life. Mary has learned not to ask when he will be back. He has learned not to promise a date. Area 51 is not the place popular culture depicts. There are no military barriers every 100 meters, no armed guards on every corner. It is simply a very remote test complex in the desert, where there are no outsiders for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, where you can crash several experimental prototypes without attracting attention, and where engineers work in conditions where no one outside sees exactly what they are doing, or whether they are doing anything at all. The first test is scheduled for dawn. The logic is simple. At dawn, there are minimal thermal currents from the heated ground that would complicate the behavior of a light structure in the air. The team readies the catapult, a pneumatic launcher that will accelerate the drone to the minimum speed needed to begin independent flight. John stands 100 meters from the launch point with binoculars. He has not slept all night checking control lists and does not feel tired. The catapult fires. Aquiline rises into the air. 1 second, 2, 3. The machine builds speed. The wings generate lift. The engine runs at calculated RPM. Everything is going right. John lowers the binoculars and allows himself to think that 4 years of work were worth this moment. Then the machine banks left, begins to vibrate, and drives into the ground from a height of 25 meters. Impact. A cloud of dust. Silence lasting several seconds. The team stands and stares at the place where the first prototype just was. Then the chief control systems engineer takes out a dictaphone and begins reciting observations in a dry mechanical voice, as if describing someone else's failure. John walks to the wreckage. The left wing is broken at the root. The engine has been torn from its mount. 4 years of work as scrap metal and carbon fiber in Nevada sand. Telemetry reveals the cause. During the catapult acceleration, the left wing generated 0.8% more lift than the right. That is less than 1% difference in the wing profile that emerged during the prototype's final assembly. But at 100 kilometers per hour, this negligible asymmetry became an overturning moment that the control system could not compensate for in fractions of a second. John stares at these numbers for a long time, then tells the team what they are doing next. The second prototype stays airborne for 11 minutes. It completes the first planned maneuver and even responds correctly to a lateral gust of wind. Then the gyroscope in the control system fails. The drone loses orientation and enters an uncontrolled descent. The team watches through binoculars from 2 kilometers away. They locate the landing site by the dust cloud. The fuselage is intact, the wings are broken. The gyroscope cost $8,000. The third prototype stays airborne for 43 minutes and completes the full planned route over part of the range. It makes the correct turns at the waypoints and returns on the reciprocal heading. This is the first time in the program's entire history that a prototype has done exactly what it was supposed to do. The team applauds at the telemetry screens. Then the third prototype overshoots its calculated landing point by 800 meters and comes down in a dry riverbed. The landing gear breaks on impact. Simultaneously, the main navigation problem comes to light, one that John had long suspected but that only became obvious during actual tests. Navigation by the electromagnetic field of power transmission lines works in the controlled conditions of the range, where the route is simple and known in advance. But when simulating a real route over Soviet territory, it becomes clear that Soviet power lines are arranged differently from American ones. Different span length between poles, different voltage, different magnetic characteristics. John calls the CIA handler and explains the problem directly. The handler is silent for a few seconds, then asks whether there is a solution. John says there are several, but each one adds weight, complexity, or cost, and usually all three simultaneously. The handler says the program's expenditure is already drawing questions from the finance directorate. $35 million spent. Not one drone at operational readiness. That is difficult to explain to senior leadership. That night, John sits in his motel room 120 kilometers from the range and cannot sleep. He thinks about his wife, who does not know where he is. Just on a business trip in Nevada, near Las Vegas. I cannot say more. About his children, who have grown accustomed to their father disappearing for long stretches and ask questions with the intonation of adults. About 3 wrecked prototypes, and about the fact that he has 2 prototypes left and, by his inner sense, roughly 18 months until the program is shut down. In the morning, he returns to the range and tells the team they are redesigning the navigation system from scratch. This means another 6 months of work. This means no operational tests over Soviet territory this year. The handler will have to explain why money has been spent, and there are no results. But John sees no other path. He is an engineer. He solves problems rather than pretending they are solved. And he goes into the hangar, picks up a blank sheet of paper, and starts drawing a new navigation layout from the beginning. There is one more thing he thinks about that night but will not say to anyone on the team. He thinks about the possibility that this task is too complex for the technologies that exist right now. That the gap between what the CIA wants and what the engineering science of the 1960s can deliver may simply be too large to bridge for reasonable money in reasonable time. He thinks about this for a long time. Then gets up, washes his face, and drives to the range. Because he sees no other way out. 1968. Project Aquiline has existed for 6 years. The program has spent $50 million. John is 40 years old. Gray has begun to appear at his temples and he has stopped noticing it. The team has shrunk from 12 to 7 people. 3 moved to other projects. 1 quit the company and relocated to another state. The remaining 7 know the project inside and out and believe in it with a degree of stubbornness that either borders on professional madness or is its definition. The 4th prototype is ready for testing. It differs from previous versions in nearly everything. A new wing profile, the 15th of those tested in the wind tunnel over the past 2 years. A new control system with improved gyroscopes of Japanese manufacture, which proved more precise and reliable than American counterparts. A new navigation scheme that uses a combination of landmarks, magnetic anomalies of major rivers, and characteristic mountain ridge profiles as additional map reference points. The first launch of the 4th prototype goes differently. The machine leaves the catapult cleanly, without banking. Levels off at 40 meters, reaches its working altitude of 300 meters on schedule. Makes the first planned turn over the waypoint 30 kilometers from the launch site. and takes up the reciprocal heading. The team stands at the telemetry screens in silence because everyone remembers how many times a good start ended badly. 40 minutes, 50, 1 hour. The drone continues flying the route. John stands at the screen and watches the telemetry data. Altitude stable, heading stable, engine running smoothly. He thinks about the fact that this is the first time in 6 years that one of his prototypes is doing exactly what it is supposed to do for exactly the amount of time the test program calls for. Then at 900 meters, the engine begins to misfire, an uneven sound that John recognizes immediately because he has heard it hundreds of times during bench testing. The fuel system. Fuel delivery is unstable, the engine is receiving it unevenly and beginning to deliver inconsistent thrust. The control system attempts to compensate, making corrections to the position of the control surfaces. On the telemetry screen, you can see the drone yawing off heading, losing and gaining altitude in small oscillations. The drone descends. Slowly, unevenly, but under control. The control system compensates for the thrust loss by adjusting the angle of attack and landing heading. The machine comes down 2.5 kilometers from the calculated landing point, catches a bush with the left wing, and flips over. When the team reaches the site in 2 pickup trucks across rough terrain, they find the fuselage intact, the left wing broken and the engine still running, coughing out its last revolutions on the remaining fuel. 1 hour and 6 minutes airborne, the best result in the program's entire history, and the occasion for a conversation John has been postponing for 3 months. He gathers the team in the hangar right beside the wreckage of the 4th prototype and speaks plainly. The gasoline engine with its fuel system is a weak point that cannot be entirely eliminated in the current design. Every subsequent prototype will encounter this same problem in one form or another. A plutonium RTG would solve this problem completely. No fuel pumps, no carburetors, no leaks or blockages. A constant, stable source of thermal energy with no moving parts, capable of running for 30 years without maintenance. But developing one in a configuration compatible with Aquiline's dimensions means another 3 years of work and at least another $45 million. The CIA handler arrives a week later. John shows him the recording of the 4th prototype's flight, shows him the telemetry, explains what went wrong with the fuel system and why the next version will be more reliable. Then places 2 documents on the table. First, an estimate for upgrading the gasoline version to operational readiness within 18 months. Second, an estimate for transitioning to the nuclear variant with the program's full potential within 3 years. The handler stares at both documents for a long time, then says he needs to consult with the finance directorate and the directorate's leadership. This is a standard phrase John has heard many times, but this time there is something different in it, a kind of finality, a sense that the consultation will not end in the program's favor. John nods and says he will wait for the answer. The handler leaves. John goes into the hangar and starts the 5th prototype. The 5th prototype is built in an atmosphere John has never before felt in his team. People work in silence, not because there is nothing to talk about, but because each of the remaining 7 understands that the answer from Langley might come before the 5th machine gets off the ground. No one says the word closure out loud, but it hangs in the air of the hangar just as palpably as the smell of aviation oil and hot metal. John works on the 5th prototype with a particular attention to detail that his team notices but does not comment on. Every wing attachment fitting is checked 3 times. Every electrical contact is tested by hand. The fuel system gets a new delivery layout with a backup pump. If this is the last machine he will build in this program, he wants it to fly correctly, not for the CIA, for himself and for the team that gave several years of their lives to this project. The answer comes 3 months later, not a phone call and not a letter. The handler comes in person. He brings an official document bearing several signatures and dryly explains the decision. The program has spent a total of approximately $100 million, accounting for all phases and related development work. Current technologies do not allow operational readiness to be achieved within a reasonable time frame. The intelligence community's priorities have shifted in favor of next-generation satellite systems. Project Aquiline is closed. John hears this standing up. He does not sit, does not interrupt, does not ask questions. When the handler finishes speaking, John nods and says the team will transfer all documentation in the prescribed manner. The handler leaves. John stands in the middle of the hangar and looks at the 5th prototype, which will never fly. Then walks to the calculation board and begins taking down the sheets. Carefully, one by one. It will take several days. If you find these forgotten stories just as fascinating, stories that lay in classified archives for decades, we would be very grateful if you subscribed to the channel. We believe that the stories of people who sacrificed years of their lives for ideas they could not tell anyone about deserve to be heard. Your subscription helps us continue this work. Project Aquiline was officially closed in the spring of 1971. 5 prototypes went into storage in the agency's holdings. The documents received a classification meaning 50 years until declassification. The engineering team dispersed to other programs or resigned. Officially, this project never existed in public expenditure registers or open archives. The Soviet response to Aquiline's existence was zero, for the single reason that the KGB did not know about the program. Not one declassified document in the CREST archive points to an intelligence leak during the project's 9 years of existence. In this sense, Aquiline achieved absolute success in operational security, while achieving absolute failure as a technical program. What Soviet command did not know was how close American intelligence had come to creating a fundamentally new class of surveillance assets. The concept of an autonomous drone with a low radar signature, capable of operating without a real-time operator, survived the closure of Aquiline and continued to develop in classified laboratories over the following decades. The program's true effect only became clear 30 years later. The acoustic concealment technologies for small aircraft that John's team developed became part of the general body of knowledge in the field of stealth. The principles of biomimetic aerodynamics found application in the development of subsequent generations. The methods of autonomous navigation without direct real-time operator control became the foundation for later systems. In 1994, General Atomics conducted the first flight of the Predator drone. This machine did not look like a bird, but in its architecture was the same fundamental idea that Aquiline's engineers had defended for 9 years and that other specialists then developed in other classified programs. An unmanned reconnaissance platform capable of operating autonomously over enemy territory without risking a pilot's life. The CREST archive, the CIA's declassified records resource, began releasing materials on Project Aquiline from 2017. By 2020, more than 40 documents were in the public domain, including the prototype's technical specifications, test protocols from Area 51, the program leadership's internal correspondence, and financial reports. These documents revealed the scale of what was accomplished and the scale of what had to be abandoned. One of the declassified documents contains an anonymous internal assessment of the program written a year before its closure. In it, there is one sentence that could serve as an epitaph for the entire project. We are building weapons for the next war using the technologies of the last one. In 30 years, we will be proven right. Today, we are not. That person was right. He simply did not live to find out. Today, biomimetic drones disguised as birds are a reality. The intelligence services of many countries use them to collect information in inaccessible or guarded areas. Some modern examples are so sophisticated that ornithologists cannot distinguish them from living birds, even under close observation through optics. What seemed like a mad idea in the 60s has become a standard intelligence tool in the 21st century. If John could see these machines, he would recognize his own work in them. Not the specific blueprints and not the specific solutions, but the logic itself, the very idea he defended for 9 years in St. Louis hangars and in the Nevada desert. Nature had already solved the problem of undetected flight. We simply needed to study it carefully enough. He was right from the very beginning. The world just was not ready to hear it. John came home in the summer of 1971. Mary had made dinner. The children showed him their grades from the last term. After dinner, she asked whether that long project had finally ended. He said yes. She asked whether everything had gone well. He said more or less. That was the only conversation about 9 years of his life that he had devoted to a mechanical bird with a nuclear heart. He continued working at McDonnell Douglas for another 2 decades. He participated in other projects, many of which were also classified and also required silence. He retired in the early 90s. He lived in the same suburban house he had bought before Project Aquiline began. He never gave public interviews about his work, because the documents remained classified until the end of his life. The people who built Aquiline never received awards they could show their families or mention in an obituary. They could never explain to their children or grandchildren exactly what they had worked on for so long and why it mattered. Their contribution to the history of intelligence and the history of unmanned systems was real, significant, and completely invisible to the world for nearly 50 years. This is the price of secrecy, and it is not organizations that pay it. Individual people pay it. When the first Aquiline documents became publicly available in 2017, most of the people who built the program were already well into their 80s. Some were no longer alive. They never learned that the world would finally read their technical reports, that engineers of the next generation would study their mistakes and their solutions, that their work would become part of the public history of the Cold War and of unmanned systems. The story of Aquiline matters today, precisely because it is a story about a failure that proved more important than many successes. Every wrecked prototype in Nevada sand, every engine failure, every unsuccessful test was a step toward knowledge without which there would be no Predator, no modern military drones, and no reconnaissance birds soaring over hotspots around the world today. Failure is a contribution too. It is simply harder to acknowledge. And one more thing that matters to understand about the people who built Aquiline. They did not know they would become part of history. They simply showed up for work every morning and solved problems that seemed important to them, not for awards, not for recognition, because they were capable of doing what they did and they understood why it needed to be done. That is reason enough. It always is. If this story moved you, leave a like. It helps the algorithm show it to more people, and every view is one more person who learns about people who worked in the shadows for decades. We recover forgotten stories from classified archives, and every subscription allows us to continue this work. Where are you watching from? Write your city in the comments. It matters to us to know from which corners of the world the people who care about this story are coming. Thank you for ensuring that John and his 6 colleagues, who built 5 mechanical birds in the Nevada desert, do not disappear into the silence of classified archives. They deserve to be remembered.